people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah,
similar
I
to this
like
because the bomber wasn't listening to anybody. But once I demonstrated, hey, I know who you are, Jahar.
Right.
And I also wrestled in high school, right? I'm trying to forge that commonality, build a rapport. And then that's when he started to comply and listen to law enforcement.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. It's a Monday morning. It's the Monday before Labor Day. I hope all of you had a great weekend. I want to thank all of you for subscribing to this channel. We've got almost 1,000 subscribers now, so thank you. Continue to hit the like button and the subscribe button and tell your friends and family and perhaps even your enemies about it, because maybe they need to learn some leadership lessons too. And also, please continue. I appreciate the support on the books that I've got out so far: the Art of Leadership, the Art of Executing Ronin Leadership Strategies, and Full Circle. My fiction, first foray into fiction, and then the sequel's coming up very soon. But get those shameless plugs out of the way, because we're really thrilled to have our guest today, Kyle Vowinkel. Kyle and I basically literally just met, in a few minutes ago before we started this podcast. I've known Kyle's brother, Brian, for a long time. We were part of an organization back in Seattle. But Kyle's got a great background, an excellent leader in his own right. He's a retired military officer, West Point graduate, FBI career, hostage rescue. We'll get him to tell you about his career. But Kyle, thank you for being on our podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your, I'm sure, still a very busy schedule, though retired, to talk to us for a few minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. It's a privilege to be here speaking with you, and other people will be interested to know that I listened to you talk about leadership back in around 2017 at FBI headquarters when I was then a unit chief, and you came to talk about leadership to a group of us senior leaders. So it's a fantastic, I know you probably don't remember me, but I remember you. And it's great to now be talking to you on your podcast, a fellow government retiree who's done a lot for their country. So thank you for your service. And again, a privilege to be here speaking with you on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I remember those sessions. I think I did two of them, but yeah, it was an honor and privilege to go on the Bureau headquarters and talk to all you all. So to begin with, maybe you could walk us through your career. Like, how did you get to where you are now? I mean, to walk us through your journey.
Excellent. So I'm very fortunate to bring a wide variety of experiences. I started out, really just an ideal model upbringing in San Diego. My father was a naval officer in Vietnam, naval aviator, and my older brother went to West Point. And so I just really kind of followed in his footsteps. Thankfully, I was able to get in. So, West Point's a preeminent leadership institution in the world, I would argue, where you study and practice leadership, on a daily basis. And I was commissioned as an Army officer, spent 5 years, most of it in the 1st Cavalry Division in Fort Hood, Texas. And I was an Airborne Ranger qualified officer. And, Ranger School still probably ranks up as the top 1 or 2 kind of physical pressures, but also it's a leadership school. At the end of the day, Ranger School is teaching officers and NCOs to be leaders and to lead soldiers in the Army. And I still reflect and look back upon those lessons, because that, to me, was the epitome of challenging leadership, right? When you are hungry, when you're cold, when you're wet and miserable, and you still have a job to do, and you've been doing it for 72 days, is how long Ranger School was, in miserable conditions, it is really hard to motivate, to lead others, and to set the example under those just incredibly harsh conditions. So I feel very fortunate. I was one of 19% of my class that graduated straight through. We had an 81% attrition rate in class 394.
Wow. Amazing.
So like my brother, as you mentioned, you know him, he also went to Ranger School. He was the distinguished honor graduate, voted by the peers and the cadres at #1. So I was nowhere near that level. I was happy to get through. So after my 5 years in the Army, I was interested in being an FBI agent. So I was a platoon leader and a company executive officer for those 5 years. So learned a lot in the Army about leading. And then I wanted to be an FBI agent, as I said. So I applied, and you'll love this. I had my master's degree. Went to night school in the Army, got my criminal justice master's, and I thought having a kind of Army background, officer, I would have got a decent chance getting into the FBI. Well, you love this. When I first applied, I was told I was non-competitive. And yeah,
Okay.
so I don't take no for an answer. So I literally drove down, met with the recruiter, and I said, what can I do to make myself more competitive? Because being an agent is my number one goal. She looks through the paperwork, and this is back when it was all, hand paperwork, not on the computer. She says, "Oh, Kyle, you look like you have a pretty good background, actually. You were just placed in the wrong pile. You are most competitive."
Oh, jeez.
So, well, I learned there, right? The value of a face-to-face interaction can never be overstated or emphasized enough. Instead of just instead of accepting the phone calls or the letters of non-acceptance or non-competitiveness, right? I took the effort and went down there. So thankfully, I was able to get in the FBI, and then I served 24 years.
Okay.
And again, very,
Wow.
very, very unique positions and experiences within the FBI. I started out in Los Angeles working counterintelligence, which I know you're familiar with. I really enjoyed that. And that was on our tactical team in LA, the Los Angeles FBI SWAT team, where we conducted the high-risk arrests, the felony searches, fugitives, etc. And I really loved that tactical aspect of it. And it was a good balance working cases as an investigator, but then also on the other hand, being part of that SWAT team. I love being part of a cohesive, high-performing team, right? And the leadership in there, I really enjoyed. Although I was not a leader in LA, I was just a case agent and a member of the squad. But as you know, you've got to be a good follower before you can be a good leader. So
Right.
instilling those lessons, because that was a step down, right? Being an Army officer in charge or second in command of 130 people. And then I stepped down to just being a member of squad, responsible for myself, but with almost increased responsibility, right? We're defending the public and upholding the Constitution as FBI agents. And then the most interesting part of my kind of FBI career now begins in earnest. I tried out for the hostage rescue team, the FBI's national level asset. Actually, it's a Department of Justice asset, the counterterrorism team, which is created back to be an equivalent law enforcement civilian entity to Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, right? Those military special mission units. So back in '83, it was formed to prepare for the '84 Olympics. So again, incredibly difficult selection criteria, similar to Ranger School, right? Very high attrition rate. It's a 2-week long initial, gut wrenching tryout, and then if you're invited to come back for another year of training after that, or about 9 months, I should say, then if you succeed at that, then you're fortunate enough to be placed on a team and an operator on the hostage rescue team. But that's only 25% again. So I luckily kind of squeezed through the cracks there, or slipped through the cracks and made the team. And I was an operator, right? I was going through doors, chasing bad guys, high risk fugitives, right? The most dangerous criminals at the highest levels. The hostage rescue team would receive those missions to go capture those individuals or hunt for those fugitives, or do renditions overseas, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right? The hostage rescue team would receive in those highest risk missions in the most difficult environments, because that's all HRT does, right? Is train each and every day in the harshest of conditions and environments. And so I did that for 8 years. I was at GS-14. I was a supervisor there the last 3 years. And then I transitioned, right? I should back up, right? HRT, right? The assault principles are speed, surprise, violence of action, right? When we're conducting a hostage rescue, that is the, again, core principles for which we effect a true hostage rescue operation. But after 8 years, on HRT, and I'd done 3 years again in LA SWAT, my wife said, you need to take a break. You need to stop, Kyle. And so I went to the crisis. I went to the crisis negotiation unit, right?
Okay.
Where the crisis negotiation unit now, right? They don't intimidate through violence. They're not about speed, surprise. They're about using words as weapons, right? They want to bend and influence others by listening and using their mouth, right? Instead of wielding weapons or intimidation tactics. So it's really a kind of polar opposites. If you look at the perspectives of a hostage rescue tactical team or, a negotiator, ideally, right, they work together and they synchronize efforts and are on the same, what we say, parallel tracks. But that doesn't happen all the time, right? As you know, there are differences of perspectives. There's different opinions. Sometimes
Right.
egos get in the way. And one of the things about leadership, as we'll talk to, is being a negotiator. You're just an advisor to the decision maker, right? And the decision maker will take input from tactical, will take it from negotiators. But the more effective you are as a leader, even if it's an informal leader as an advisor, right? The more effective you are as that informal leader, the more influence you have, and really the better leader you are. So I
Right.
really learned that the power of persuasion when you're not in command, but you can influence the command decisions. And I had a couple, really national level events that we can talk about later where I was able to use that position as advisor to influence the outcome and kind of bring those entities together and synchronize efforts. I would say probably some of the best jobs of that in the FBI's recent history. And
Okay.
now, lastly, I retired last year, and I'm a guest lecturer for Cornell University in their executive leadership development program. And now I go around, I talk to people, corporations, and law enforcement, and I actually do leadership interactive case studies. So it's really really enjoyable for me. I'll outline an actual mission we had in the FBI, and then I will stop at a certain point, and then the classroom will be broken into groups, and then those people will become leadership elements, 4 to 6 person teams, and I'll ask for each one of their input. Okay, here's the fact pattern. This is what you know. So what you don't know. What do you recommend the next course of action? So that's been tremendously popular, these interactive case studies, because leadership is a skill that should be
Yeah.
exercised and practiced, and you can't just expect your day-to-day leadership to be enhanced or improved if you're not actually practicing it, especially under stress with some challenging circumstances, again, which I do in those interactive case studies.
Wow. I see a book coming in your future.
I do. I've signed with an agent, David Vigliano, and we're working on one now. So maybe in a year or so, it'll be out, and hopefully, at least my brother, and family members will buy one copy.
Yeah, I got one. Hey, everybody listening to this, they'll buy a copy too. Don't worry about it. But wow, what a career. Yeah, so you're very successful, and from West Point to where you are now. But one thing you mentioned really touched me was when you were in the crisis negotiation part of it, right, with the FBI, the influencing without authority, because that happens a lot, especially in the corporate world. When I left government, we came into another, like, I was used to a top-down kind of leadership. I become the chief security officer, and it's like I'm used to, I tell people to jump, and they jump. Now I've got executives that I don't have to jump. What's the ROI for me to buy into your security program? So, as you look at your background, give an example maybe of when you had to use that influencing without authority to influence a decision that you knew needed to be made, even in the face of maybe opposition.
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. And I forgot to add one last thing. I just say it's for my job. I finished
Sure.
up as executive management in the FBI Miami division to some fantastic
Okay.
people, and so I was assistant special agent in charge there. So the other great thing about my perspective is I bring the multiple levels of perspective, which I think makes one a better leader. Right? I've been a follower for many years. Then I was informal advisor, and I was going through the door as the tactical guy. And at the end, I was in command of those operations. I was the one that approved the order that sent in those tactical guys. I had the tactical and negotiators under my control for high risk operations. So having done those things beforehand, right, made me, I think, infinitely better as an executive at the end. So it's just those multiple different perspectives, I think, is really valuable. As the higher up you go. So probably I've got two, I think, interesting stories about the influence. First, we'll talk. Excuse me. First, I'll talk about is the Boston Marathon bombing. Horrible, right? Horrific event. 3 individuals killed at the finish line, 264 injured, like 16 amputees, and it's just a attack on U.S. soil here in our homeland, and Boston is almost shut down. Right? They're terrorized the city for a week. The 2 bombers are on the run, and I'm going to fast forward now to Thursday night. We'd sent an hostage rescue team. We have 3 different elements, and one was up there in Boston chasing down leads. And Monday's the bombing. Wednesday we released photographs. Thursday is when the bombers kind of change their behavior pattern. They go hijack the car with the individual, and then they unfortunately, prior to the car, they try to get more weapons from MIT officer Sean Collier. They shoot and kill him. And so they're on the run, and they've just demonstrated extremely risky behavior and reckless. And when they're confronted by law enforcement in Watertown that Friday morning, how do they react? Right? They fight it out. They shoot, they throw more weapons. So as we assess their behavior, everyone, myself included, thought there's no way this will be a negotiated resolution. The bombers don't want to live. But Friday morning, I'm there, and I proactively prepared, just on that 1 in a million chance. If I ended up talking to the bomber, no one really tasked me. I talked to my fellow crisis negotiator colleagues, and we were just proactive, just like the Boy Scout motto. I was a Boy Scout. Be prepared, right? It's my job to be prepared on that small chance. And then that day on Friday, his wrestling coach had been on CNN. He was interviewed, and he talked positively about the bomber. And we look for people who can influence, who law enforcement can leverage their influence to help us influence the other individual. And so I called his wrestling coach, Peter Payak, about an hour, spoke with him Friday during the day, and got some valuable details about the bomber. So now fast forward to Friday night, the shelter-in-place order is lifted. The bomber is found in the back of the boat. When the homeowner checks the back of his boat, law enforcement surrounds it. They shoot hundreds of rounds at him. And then I was back at the Arsenal Mall parking lot with 2,000 other law enforcement officers, and I see HRT assembling to go out there to resolve it. Right, the Joint Command Post then decides to deploy HRT to resolve the incident at the boat. And this is an example of being proactive and kind of influencing others. I run over there because they're getting their vehicles getting ready to go, the HRT, and I grabbed the team leader, and I just said, "Hey man, can I hop in your vehicle? To bring a negotiator." That is our SOP to always have them deploy together, but negotiators were not even considered, right? I had to kind of insert myself and say, "Hey, you mind if I hop in?" "All right, sure, we got one room, hop in the last vehicle." Right? So I was able, because of that kind of respect and 8 years on the team, knowing the team leader, and he knew me, that trust over those years was what allowed me to influence him to let me hop in. So we get to the site, and they had tried to dislodge him with a Bearcat they tried to eject him from there, and that didn't work. Right? There's like overwhelming pressure. Everybody wanted to kill the guy. Right? He had murdered innocent 8-year-old, and 3 others died at him and his brother's hands. So the emotions were very high from law enforcement, and this desire for justice. However, I knew, and my FBI colleagues knew, that there could be other bombers out there. Right? There could be another cell, or there could be a bomb waiting to detonate in New York City in Times Square. But nobody knew that. So it was our job to kind of influence others, and the team leader there just did a masterful job of taking charge of the scene, kind of instilling order into the chaos. And they tried to deploy some flash bangs, and those are non-lethal concussion devices, to eject him from the boat. That was not successful. And I'm just kind of standing off to the side, and I have my radio, and then all of a sudden I hear, chatter. Hey, SIOC, which is the FBI Strategic Information Operations Center, you're familiar with, they're listening and monitoring every word. Right, we got a drone overhead, and SIOC relays, let's try to negotiate. So then the team leader goes, 3 words, I'll never forget, Kyle, you're up. So now it's my job to try to influence this individual in the boat who everyone else has shot at him, tried to kill him, and it's kind of reverse the law enforcement pyramid, right? We usually escalate up the deadly force pyramid, starting at the bottom with just law enforcement presence, followed by verbal commands, followed by non-lethal, and the very tip is deadly force. Well, they had gone deadly force at the very beginning in the bomber,
Right.
and now I was tasked to start at the very bottom to try to influence and connect the bomber. So thankfully, I had been prepared. As I explained to you, I talked to that wrestling coach, and using, basic crisis intervention skills and negotiation skills over an hour. It took a lot of time, but I was able to persuade him to come out of the boat and surrender
Wow.
to the authorities. So that's the story in a nutshell. But I was an informal leader, and especially with the subject, right? He didn't have to listen to me, but I was able to build rapport and use that intimate knowledge of his background and his wrestling coach to, again, kind of build a bridge to him. So people have a tough time, right, connecting with difficult clients or difficult customers. Try connecting with a terrorist, especially one that I loathed, right? I wanted him dead. I could care less if he lived or died, but I wanted him alive to see if there were other cells or bombs.
Wow, that must have been a great sense of satisfaction when you were able to successfully negotiate that situation.
Oh, it's crazy because that was a lot of pressure, right? I'll never forget when they said, Kyle, you're up. I started walking up the stairs, and just like, ascending any kind of mountaintop, the first 2 or 3 steps, I thought to myself, man, every word is going to be second guessed. Everything I say and do here is recorded, monitored, and will be Monday morning quarterbacked by everyone, regardless of the outcome. And then like the 3rd or 4th step, I told myself, F it, right?
Yeah.
This is my job. I'm prepared for this. I know what I'm doing, and I don't care what everyone else says or does. So I really just kind of clicked and turned that off, because, you cannot dwell on that pressure. Just acknowledge it, compartmentalize it, and then I thankfully, performed well.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that too. First of all, fascinating story. Thank God you and your colleagues were able to put a stop to that situation. So we touch you guys a debt of gratitude. But it was interesting. I think people have this thing about leadership. Okay, leaders always, like, you always feel like you have it all together, but often you don't, right? No matter your background or training. When you talk about walking up those steps, it's no different than maybe some leader is taking over their first unit, or you're taking over your first board meeting, or whatever it is, and no matter what your background, there's always to me, a little bit of hesitation, like, am I good enough? Can I do this? But exactly what you said, you flip the switch and you said, yeah, I can do this. I have to do this, right?
Yeah, we all go through that little bit of, imposter syndrome or worry. Am I good enough? I've been trained enough. And at the end of the day, like, every other technique had failed, right, to kind of elicit cooperation from him. And part of me thought, well, he's dead anyways. So I was trying to minimize it in my mind. And, luckily the kind of key things is, right, I'd wrestled in high school. I wasn't very good. But when I talked to him, right, after maybe 20 or 30 minutes, I threw down that like ace card. I said, I know who you are, Jahar. And Jahar was his nickname that his close friends and his wrestling coach used to refer to him. So that was that like key kind of lightning bolt connecting moment. Again, not exactly a leader to a subordinate, but to influence, right? You need to be able to have a true connection with someone, as you know, to really influence them. And I was able to bond with him because he instantly knew I knew who he was. And it's kind of like that Teddy Roosevelt quote, which I really like for leadership. People don't care how much you know. until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah. I
similar to
like
this,
it.
because the bomber wasn't listening to anybody. But once I demonstrated, hey, I know who you are, Jahar, and
Right.
I also wrestled in high school, right? I'm trying to forge that commonality, build a rapport, and then that's when he started to comply and listen to law enforcement. So just like
Right.
leadership too, like you have to get to know your people and devote time to get to know them. I remember in Miami, I had 150 people roughly in my branch, and every Monday and Friday, I would have my assistant. I'd block off 1 hour, like on Monday mornings, and 1 hour on Friday afternoons. And they would get bumped every once in a while, but I dedicated that time just to walk around, to talk, and just kind of BS with my people. I wasn't there to reprimand. I wasn't there to pat them on the back, although I would if I had something recently done. But I wanted to get to know them better, and I think that's an integral piece which leaders sometimes forget. They're so focused on the strategic big picture, they need to also have that personal engagement with their teams.
See, I think that's awesome. Of all the people that I've interviewed on this podcast, you're the first one that's mentioned that. And I remember I did a similar thing. I would block out certain periods of time and just walk around, management by walk around, they used to call it, right?
Right.
And Colin Powell used to do that even when he was Sec State, just walk around and visit the troops. And it's amazing to me how many leaders, you got people around you in next offices, you don't even stop by to say hi, or right. So it's cool that you did that. One other thing that struck me too is you've in your career, you're constantly trying to push yourself, obviously,
Right.
so West Point wasn't hard enough. Then you have to go Airborne and Ranger. That's not hard, all that, right? So, and then HRT. What do you think that drives you? Well, it's a two-part question. There was a time in my career when I went from leading people like you to, and when you said, you left command in the military, you went to the bureau, and in essence, you're an agent, individual contributor, part of a squad. I left at CTC at Counterterrorism Center, and I went to the IG staff for a while as an investigator, but I was an individual contributor. In my case, I saw great experience, but I saw stuff that was happening from a leadership perspective, and I didn't like it because, frankly, they were not great leaders there at the time, but I couldn't do anything about it, and so
Right.
I made sure I wanted to get back in the game and be a leader. So, number one, what do you think has driven you to continue to challenge yourself? And number two, when you found yourself in the bureau, did you always know that you were going to then get back in the leadership game eventually?
Yes, I think to answer the first question, I've always been fortunate to have that intrinsic motivation to push myself further, faster, and I always wanted to work with the best of the best, right? And at HRT especially, I was able to work in the company of heroes, right? Because even when I was in the Army officer, I knew I wanted to at least try out for HRT. So that was my kind of pinnacle end goal, even starting out, because I heard about and read about HRT when I was a cadet at West Point, and that kind of set my path. I knew then I got to test myself really hard in the Army to go to Airborne and Ranger school and be the best leader I could be. And then at HRT, right, I felt truly ordinary there among the extraordinary,
Sure.
right? Because everyone there is extraordinary. It's like a gathering of eagles, bald eagles. They're kind of solo, but then they come together, just incredible kind of teamwork and collaboration. And talking about leadership, I love the leadership kind of model. There was everybody kind of had a voice once you'd earned your spot on the team, because when you're preparing the assault plan, right, the whole team would get together, that individual unit, 8 to 12 guys, to discuss it, and then float ideas, and the ATL, assistant team leader, and team leader would finalize it, and they'd send it up. But you had input, you had to say, because at the end of the day, I'm putting my life on the line going through that door, as well as everyone else on the team. So that really was it wasn't collective leadership because it's clear chain of command, but you had input. It was a collaborative form of it. And I really enjoy that even now, because I know I don't have all the best ideas. And it doesn't bother me too. Like, this is the other thing, I think some leaders let ego get in the way. Like I was very comfortable, uh, especially as an executive in Miami, saying, "Hey, I don't know how to do this. I'm not sure the best way. What do you guys think?" Right? I think the more open and honest and transparent you are with your team, because I had proven myself time and time again, and I know I had earned my position as a senior leader, and I
Right.
welcome those people that maybe challenged me or said, "Let's try this another way," because I know I
Yeah,
didn't have all
sure.
the answers. So I think a accepting of other people's ideas is so important as well to kind of build consensus. As you mentioned, like Colin Powell is a fantastic example of American leader, and I look up to him as well. And like General Eisenhower too, with his
Mhm.
consensus building collaborative style leadership on the multinational force, which whole nother topic. But that was probably one of the most momentous, important leadership decisions in the history of man, was when to launch the Normandy invasion. And he took his
Right.
input from his 5 or 6 key generals, right when they had that small weather opening. He said, "All right, let's go around the table. What do you think? What do you think?" And he took their input, and then he made the decision, and he accepted responsibility for it too, because that is key. As you know, I viewed myself as a leader, kind of like an umbrella. If the
Mhm.
shit starts coming down from up top, I'm going to try to open my wide umbrella and protect my people the best I can. And then
Right.
as soon as credit is coming or recognition, I would close that umbrella. Then it was my job to distribute that credit where it was due. And literally, don't take a single of it, because I didn't need that. Right. I think once you reach a certain level of success too, right, you realize that it is about empowering your team and recognizing your team for their contributions.
Right. It's not about you. Yep. Yeah. No, yeah, that I love the Eisenhower analogy. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome. For those people who are watching this and they don't know, tell us about your shirt.
Oh, so this is the West Point crest. I graduated in '93, and my brother graduated in '90, and I'm very
Okay.
fortunate. My two oldest boys also went. My oldest boy just graduated, the class of
Okay.
2023. So really cool. He's exactly 30 years
Yeah.
past my class.
Yeah.
Uh, and now he's a cyber officer for the United States Army. Very, very proud of him. And my middle son is a junior right now. So we have obviously a very strong West Point connection. And actually, they just invited me last week, talking about coming back up. I've done it a couple times in the past, but I love going to speak to cadets about leadership, about
Right.
teamwork and collaboration. So yeah, I'm going to go up again here in a few months, talking to them about in extremis leadership, right, which is leading when lives are on the line, because that
Right.
is really the pinnacle of leadership.
That's awesome. Great lineage you've got going here, you
Thanks.
know.
I'm very, very proud of my family.
Yeah, yeah, I had only one experience at West Point when I was on the board of directors for ISMA. It's a security organization of chief security officers. And there was a person on there that had great connections with West Point. And so we did a board meeting there, but we did a bunch of leadership stuff at Thana, the leadership center there. So that one was amazing. You know, we got to eat with the cadets and see how fast they got chow in and out, and it was an amazing process.
Yeah, it's a wonderful institution. I think every red-blooded patriotic American should go to one football game at Mikey Stadium there at West Point, and one Army Navy game, to really see like American youth and Americana at their best. Right, they come on the fields of friendly strife to battle, and it's just so moving and patriotic to see the flyovers. A lot of parachutists jump in to watch the games. It's just, I hope that you can make it for a weekend, or go to Boston this year, Army Navy.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, because my dad, he's passed away, but he retired as an E7, and so in the Army. So I've always been partial, obviously, to Army.
I like to hear that.
So I think in today's environment, I think it's always challenging to be a leader, no matter what era you're in. But I think today's environment may be even more challenging. There's just a lot of stuff going on. Business is different, hybrid work style. In my opinion, there's a lack of leadership up and down, whether it's business or in government, especially. What advice would you give for a young leader that's having to look out at this ecosystem and trying to figure out what are the things I need to do to to prepare myself to be a leader that can manage in today's environment?
Well, it's a terrific question because I do agree with you. It seems to be like a leadership vacuum, or maybe even a hesitancy to be that proactive leader, right? Because there is so much kind of Monday morning quarterbacking. There's so much second guessing, and it's very politicized right now, which I can't stand. Right, our country's
Yeah,
not perfect, but it's still the greatest country on earth, and we can
Roger
always
that.
strive to improve. I'm all for that. At the end of the day, right? I think unity is what leaders need to kind of focus on. How can I bring people together, entities together, to accomplish the mission? Because that divisiveness, right, is what's really, I think, all these friction points are. Right, we have more in common than we have that separates us. And the other challenge too, right, is the immediacy of information flow. As you know, back for the Boston bombing, right, that was 2013. That was the first like really social media massive national investigation, meaning that people are live recording with their cell phones images of the bombing, so that the public, in Wisconsin or California, within a minute or two, is seeing images of the bombing. Whereas before, law enforcement and decision makers had time to prepare responses, they had time to formulate plans. Well, now the public is receiving information instantly. They want to know instantly what's going on. And that's a very, very challenging situation. And one of the things they didn't do the best in Boston was have a joint information center, right? So you need to have, especially the multi-agencies, multi-jurisdiction, you need to have a coordinated messaging. So that's the other thing I would say to leaders out there is, identify who are your key stakeholders, and you need to prepare before a crisis, of course, to develop and build those relationships with them. But I would stress that trying to unify them and have joint messaging to kind of show solidarity, show togetherness, show unity, that you are accomplishing whatever the mission is, and accepting responsibility and accountability when it doesn't go well. Because that also, I think, is a trait just so bothersome to me. Like, I've made mistakes every day of my bureau career, and I'll be the first guy to admit it. But you rarely see people take ownership of their failures.
Yep. They don't nowadays. That is probably one of the biggest flaws I see in so-called leaders today. They'll take credit for everything that goes right, but if something goes south, somebody else did it.
Exactly. But to me, that leader gains even more stature. They gain even more respect to me when the leader owns up to it and says, you know what, my bad. So that's what I would encourage the young leaders to do. It's okay to take responsibility. I actually applaud that, right? That was an old Army leadership axiom. Take and seek responsibility for your actions. And I can't think of the last time I saw some CEO or public figure say, my bad, I screwed up here.
It doesn't happen. I mean, you even saw that in the latest thing in Maui, right? Where everybody putting fingers at each other now, as opposed to, hey, we screwed the pooch on this one, I think, and so how are we going to make it better, right? But it doesn't happen.
Yeah, the Maui. My wife's born and raised in Hawaii, and so that Maui tragedy really struck near and dear to her and her family's heart, because they have friends over there, and the really absence of leadership seems like there, and that crisis preparation and then the crisis response was just really not ideal, of course.
Yeah. Well, frankly, I could sit and talk to you for a long time. In fact, I probably want to get you back on so we could go more in depth into HRT and some of those other things, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and I actually was going to say that because we didn't even touch upon that second story, and I think that's a great idea. Save it for next time. Is the Alabama hostage taking, and it's, I think, the greatest, and not just me, but it's widely accepted as the greatest hostage rescue recovery mission, one of them in the FBI's history. And it's an incredible story of leadership, teamwork, and just some incredible heroics at the end. So yeah, I'd love to come on in the future, Mike, to talk to you and your listeners about that.
It can happen. We'll get it scheduled actually as soon as we can. Get you back on. That's another first. You'll be the first to come back, for repeat performance. But
all righty.
It's been wonderful getting to know you and listening to you, Kyle. You have a fascinating background. Thank you again for everything you've done for our great nation, and also the leadership points you you've mentioned they have been spot on. If people wanted to get a hold of you, maybe they want you to come to speak to them. What's the best way?
Oh, thanks so much. And this is my job now, right? To go to talk and facilitate leadership learning. So I'm on LinkedIn. That's easy. Kyle Vowinkel. But also have my company, consulting company, is called Apex Risk Consulting.us. And they can reach out to me there, because these interactive case studies where I facilitate this leadership learning with leaders gets super popular, and people, again, it just resonates with them getting to practice these leadership skills, and I interweave it with actual stories of what really happened. And I'd love to hear from your listeners or other individuals looking for speaker engagements or those leadership kind of seminars.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we'll make sure we give you a wide shout out on social media and Twitter and all these other things too. So
Terrific.
hey, appreciate it. Well, that's it for today for the Ronin Leadership Podcast. This has been a great session. I think all of you are going to learn a lot from what Kyle's had to tell us. And like I said, we will bring it back on again. Continue to subscribe, the like button, the subscribe button, and we'll be back at you very soon. Take care.
Take care. Thanks again for having me, Mike.